fueron de 43.
While dialing through the radio waves, you stumble upon a frequency.
A liminal station dedicated to exploring the strange, the unexplained,
and the macabre.
You are about to embark on a journey into the fantastical spectrum of human imagination.
Broadcasting to you live from a dimension of mystery.
It's the Nightmare Frequency.
Hark! Who ghost there? I'm Mac W. Monty, one half of the Nightmare Frequency.
And I am Lucky. Together we are your travel agents to the unexplored regions of human understanding.
Your boorologists, if you will, diagnosing the darkest depths of mystery and terror and all things inexplicable.
Let's get this party startled. Tonight we're taking a look at... Don't be scared, Mac. We know what's going to happen. Tonight we're taking a look at Tomino's Hell, a 100-year-old Japanese poem that, when read aloud, allegedly curses the reader to a dark fate. But first, we're looking at something a little less scary and much, much shorter.
Shakespeare famously wrote that brevity is the soul of wit. Here at the Nightmare Frequency, we like to say that brevity is the soul of terror. You don't need a whole book or even a few pages to scare an audience. In fact, an argument could be made that all you need is 2 sentences. Ernest Hemingway allegedly won a bet with his drinking buddies for coming up with the following infamous 2-sentence story. For sale, baby shoes, never worn.
Which is really not so much scary as it is very sad. And in my opinion, a little bit of a bending of the truth of the colon in there. But the internet has carried on Hemingway's legacy by churning out very short and no doubt drunkenly written stories.
I mean, those are not even full sentences.
This trend of 2-sentence horror stories has inspired countless internet threads, a television show on the CW, as well as bedwetting. We present to you now some of our greatest finds.
I found a few really good ones, by which I mean really bad ones. I got all of these from the 2-sentence horror stories subreddit, and they all seem to follow like the exact kind of formula where the first sentence is something really innocuous, and then the second sentence is supposed to be like a gut punch of terror.
Yeah.
So without further ado, this one's from Psychedelic Yogurt. An eye for an eye leaves the whole world blind. Eddie the Eye Eater thought as he began to feast.
It's not, for me, the initial thought is more about the backstory and intricacy of Eddie. Like, why is he thinking about that while eating the eyes? But he's not blinding people. So he's like trying to make people awake to what's going on. Is this like a radical politician?
I don't know how well they thought out the lore of Eddie the Eye Eater, but he's thinking about eyes while he eats them.
Yeah, so I guess it's on par for the name. I'll give him that. Well developed.
Eddie the Eye Eater sounds like the character from a children's storybook.
Like an old grim fairy tale where they want kids to, like, I don't know, not spying on whatever their parents are doing. So if you look through the floorboards, Eddie the Eye Eater will get you.
What? There's someone down below, Papa?
Yes, little Timothy. I'm sorry to tell you this way, but if you push your eye up against the ground, Eddie will get you. Here's one. I decided to kill off a few characters in the book I'm writing. It should definitely spice up this autobiography a little. And that's from user Kilroy137 from BuzzFeed.com.
Who is he telling that to?
I know, because again, it's an autobiography, so he's telling himself.
I love this formula of like, not something not scary. It's scary. And those are the 2 sentences. That's what makes a horror story. Here's a good one. This is from Alaska on Reddit. I asked my daughter what she wanted Santa to bring her for Christmas. She responded with something so terrifying that I can't even repeat it. It kind of leaves you wanting a little bit there. Teases you.
I guess I could be scared with my own. I'm doing a lot of the legwork though, right? Like I have to imagine the thing that's going to scare me and then apply it to the story. It's a little bit lazy. Here's one that I think is really going to give you shivers, tip to toes.
Tingle my spine.
Day 312. Internet still not working.
Oh, so they're having some fun with that one.
And that's from countryliving.com.
That's like a boomer making fun of a 2-sentence horror story that a millennial would tell.
It was, and just for context, it was on this like very vibrantly purple signage with like a fun, cute little ghost at the bottom. Like it was very country living. I loved it.
What is country living about that other than like having bad internet?
It's country living, man. Like it's not for you or I to know. We're city boys. It's countryliving.com. How could they possibly not be true to country living?
I guess that's true. Anything they post on there is by definition country living. This is from user gayasslover69. The Fall Out Boy concert was going great until boys started falling out of the sky. That's actually interesting. You know, I would watch an anthology show where people are at a concert and boys start tumbling from the sky. Not just any concert though. It's a Fall Out Boy concert. So I just want to pull the camera back on these two sentences and just kind of, it's also one sentence sort of broken up. Like a lot of these 2-sentence horror stories could be one sentence. Like you don't start a sentence with until, but aside from that, let's pull back a little bit and see, like, are the boys falling out of the sky because it's a Fall Out Boy concert, or is that a coincidence? Because I don't know which one is crazier to me.
Like through some demonic ritual, the Fall Out Boys cause boys to fall from the sky with their sick licks. It's rock, right? Fall Out Boy. We're rock music. What do the kids call it these days?
The kids don't call Fall Out Boy anything. Old people call Fall Out Boy. Old people, they don't even know what a Fall Out Boy is. They think it's a Simpsons character. This one's from Three-Legged Cinder. You always loved playing Among Us, Cheryl said as she looked down at her son's grave. Too bad I was the imposter. So this one is my favorite so far because it actually does have like a narrative that makes some amount of sense and is 2 sentences.
It's very modern too, which I appreciate about it. You know, sometimes these stories seem to take place in like the Old West or some type of medieval time, but this is very much like Among Us was maybe 4 years ago as we record being popular. That's soon. That's scary.
This one is indicative of a trend in the 2-sentence horror stories where they only have 2 sentences. So they want to go for the gut punch. And so I would say at least 50%, if not more, of all 2-sentence horror stories involve a child murdering someone or someone murdering or hurting a child.
Yeah, children are heavily involved in most of these stories. Here's one that, while not specifically child-based, I think implies it.
Okay.
I kept hearing a strange giggle coming from my TV, regardless of what channel or volume it was on. I never thought to check behind the TV.
How much room you got behind your TV, bro?
Who's putting the TV in the middle of the room? That's my thought too.
My TV, there's like no room behind my TV except for anything but some dust and a bunch of cables that I'm not sure if one connects to the Switch or to the Blu-ray player.
Yeah, like forgotten old dust bunnies, maybe a leaf from an errant plant.
This short story is so shockingly stupid because imagine this guy, he's sitting there and he's watching the big game and it's like, and then they're going down the 40-yard line. What the hell?
The fuck?
Switches over to like Scooby-Doo. Row wreck. What? That's guy. What? I want to get a Comcast guy up in here.
I appreciate that your thought of the giggle is exactly the same as mine. Like, that's exactly the giggle I'm thinking he's hearing, and he's not cluing into that more.
And it's just like he keeps flipping through the channels, and it's like, I'll get Miss Congeniality on pay-per-view. Well, I don't know. Is that in the movie?
Well, actually,
he starts watching he watches like The Ring or something, and it's like, like, oh, no, I can't tell if it's the movie. Oh, I can't tell if it's the movie or not. Because I'm imagining James Stewart. My imagination has no budget, so we can afford to bring Jimmy back from the dead. So finally he gets fed up and he calls the Comcast guy to figure out what's wrong with his television. And he's like, oh yeah, we've had a rash of this going on lately. Have you thought to check behind the TV? Oh no. Oh, I never thought to look back there. And then what? There's a ghost girl or something?
Yeah, that's my thought too. Like when he finds the girl, is he like, oh shit, and tries to help her? Because is this some small child that's just stuck there or is it a ghost? Because then, I mean, live with it, whatever. It's just like goes back there. Like it's kind of like a personal laugh track.
Well, what's the ghost doing back there? Imagine the ghost is like, thinking, oh, I'm going to scare the crap out of this dude. And then he keeps flipping the channels going, oh, what's wrong with my television? And he's like, like he's laughing. It's like, come on, man. I'm like cramping up back here. Yeah. I got 4 other people haunting this block today.
Well, and what are they haunting? Is it that errant leaf, as mentioned before, that has just landed back there that is ghost filled? Because why just behind the TV? Why would it not, like, if it was in the TV, project out a little bit? It doesn't make any sense for what we know about ghosts, the true, real facts.
I have one more. This is from Too Chloe, Too Furious. Great name. I never liked looking in the mirror because whatever looked back at me was always the evil version was me of. Done.
Lost the thread there a little bit. I just kept trying to land that plane. Couldn't quite get there.
Let's do one more time. I never liked looking in the mirror because whatever looked back at me was always the evil version was me of.
Like, I think this is a good example. You know, they talk about strokes can hit you anywhere, and you rarely see it recorded in some type of medium where you could experience it a little bit. I appreciate that about this.
Chloe, if you're out there, good luck with those hospital bills. And up next, the chilling story of a cursed poem that kills you when you read it. Lucky, why don't you tell us what we found?
Tomino's Hell is a disturbing and often graphic poem centered on a young child named Tomino. In it, they suffer abuse at the hands of their family, being punished for reasons they do not understand. The verses that follow depict their journey into hell. Legend states that the poem was written by a child in the late 1800s who was severely disabled and unable to leave their home. The child retreated into words, spending their time reading and writing poetry. The family resented having to take care of Tomino and blamed them for their misfortunes that they suffered. Due to the pain and isolation of their condition and the abuse they suffered at the hands of their family, Tomino would eventually write their final poem, Tomino's Hell. The contents of the work were so macabre that Tomino's family locked them in the ice-cold cellar, refusing to feed them until eventually the child succumbed to starvation. However, while Tomino perished, their words lived on, capturing the feelings of sadness, isolation, and suffering of a helpless child. Some even believe that a part of Tomino's pain imprinted onto the very words of the poem itself. Many people claim to feel uneasy after reading even a part of the poem out loud, while others who finish the work supposedly suffer side effects such as sudden illness, falls, and other accidents. In the 1980s, the trend of filming friends reading Tomino's Hell aloud gained traction among teenagers in Japan. It is in this time that both a university student and a young girl were said to have died mere moments after reading the poem. Later, the death of filmmaker Terayama Shuji, who made a film inspired by Tomino's Hell, would be blamed on the poem as well.
Wait, if I read this out loud, I could die?
I'm sure that's not going to happen. You could, but...
You had me do a whole translation of the poem. I didn't know that it was going to be a death thing.
I don't really think this isn't really the appropriate place. Mac, we've kind of got a tone going. If you wouldn't mind, please reading that poem out loud for us.
Okay, all right. I have not ever read this aloud, so this will be an experiment in testing the curse. What I just said was a joke. That I knew about the risks, but I actually have not read the poem out loud in its entirety. I am a poet. I took a run at a translation for this with the help of some AI tools and some other translations I found. I didn't expect it to be. I'm just like a tiny bit. It's like when your friend busts out the Ouija board at a party and you know that like Milton Bradley or whatever makes the board and it's like a children's plaything. But there's that one moment of like, yeah, but like I also don't like light matches and throw them on the ground and let them go out, you know, because there's a chance that that's going to start a fire.
I'll be honest with you, halfway through that, I thought you were going to say Milton Bradley was like your grandpa or something. You were going to say, you know the ghost of Milton Bradley's there. Do you want to talk to him? But you're nervous to use the board.
The ghosts of Milton and Bradley, the gay lovers that founded the company.
Oh, a nice story. It'd be fun to talk to those ghosts.
They murdered each other.
Passionately?
Is there any other way? Oh gosh, I'm just delaying the inevitable.
I'm trying to calm you down with a little bit of humor. I'm hoping to break the tension a little bit.
Oh, we're recording this around midday, and at the end of July, it is very hot in my studio, so that's why I'm sweating cold bullets and have chills running up and down my spine.
The illusion of nighttime is ruined.
Without further ado, here is the full text of Tomino's Hell. Older sister vomits blood. Younger sister breathes fire, while cute little Tomino vomits precious jewels. Tomino alone descends, even flowers are absent in the darkness of hell. Is it Tomino's older sister who wields the whip? I worry about the crimson handle. Strike, strike, strike if you must. Even if you don't strike at all, the road to Avicii hell is but a single path. I beseech you to guide me to that dark hell, to the golden sheep, to the nightingale. How much caviar shall we put in the leather bag? Preparations for the journey to Avicii hell. Spring arrives, draping the woods and valleys to the spiraling chasms of the blackest hell. In the basket a nightingale, on the cart a sheep, in the eyes of lovely Tomino, tears. Sing, nightingale, in the rain of the woods with all your might, yearning for your sister. When you sing, your voice echoes in hell, and the foxglove flowers bloom. If when traveling the 7 mountains and valleys of hell, sweet Tomino's solitary journey, you come across his things, please bring them to me. The needle of the sacred mountain's pincushion. But do not pierce them with blood-red pins, for they serve as signposts for lovely little Tomino.
Okay, hang on. Is anything happening, Mac? How do you feel? Quick, check your pulse.
I'm dead!
Well, that seems like a pre-existing condition.
No, it was good. I felt a little nervous about halfway through, but I think that was just psychosomatic.
Right. But nothing's like happening around you. There's no, you're not, hang out. What was it? Falling? You're not falling.
I'm very sweaty. My hands are like a little clammy. I don't know if that's like the very strong cold brew I'm drinking or the heat or what, but I do feel like different than when I started reading the poem.
Okay. Well, let's keep our fingers crossed then that nothing happens.
Yeah, that's okay. If anything happens, the next episode will be the first like podcast seance ever as you try and reach my soul.
Yeah, thank goodness we took out that podcaster insurance on you before you read that.
I will be suing the producers of the show if something happens to me as a result of reading that poem.
Wait a minute, the producer here is Luck H. How could that be? I mean, definitely. First of all, kudos on that read. That was a beautiful representation of the work.
Thank you.
Definitely somber, definitely scary. There's definitely a very powerful message of fear, abandonment, loneliness.
Jokes aside, it's a pretty disturbing work of art.
Mm-hmm.
It's a really sad story. To read the poem, I think you would come away with a certain narrative and a certain idea of what it's about. But when you hear the story of this boy who is essentially tortured by his family, and that this is a reflection of that, I think it like brings a lot of weight to some of these words. And the poem itself does kind of read like it's written from the perspective of a child, but this poem isn't written in the first person. It's written in the third person about Tomino. Like maybe this child was finding some solace by looking at his abuse from the outside.
Yeah, separate yourself from the situation and try to get a better understanding of it, and then thread that understanding through the lens of art in the way that you express it.
Well, and if he's being abused and kept inside like all the time, this poem might have been a way for this child to try and communicate what was happening to someone. And that would perhaps, if we look at this poem in the context of the story of the legend,
right,
that would be a good reason for the family in their mind to lock him away even further, is like if the abuses come to light, that would be bad news for them. And so they choose instead to isolate the child even further by locking him in the cellar.
Yeah, through that lens of the history of the child, it's interesting to the threads that come up. Like I kind of get locked on that crimson whip that is referenced a couple of times. Because, if we're looking at it through a cry of help and the things that they're trying to maybe have somebody else understand, that comes up a lot. That kind of sticks in my head, as well as like the nightingale, like probably a representation of Tomino themselves. But at the same time, you're getting sentences where the nightingale and Tomino are like separated. So I'm curious, just as a reader, what that means. Like, what is the hidden message there that's being delivered?
There's a few phrases like that I was curious about. So I did a little bit of digging, and in that first stanza, there's the line, older sister vomits blood, younger sister breathes fire, while cute little Tomino vomits precious jewels. Spitting jewels is apparently an idiom in Japan, another way of saying victory or having or have had a victory. So him spitting up jewels is almost like something positive has happened to Tomino in that moment. There is something that he's done. I mean, also an abused child, to reinforce that, wouldn't go to hell. right?
You
I
would
mean,
think
this is
so.
if this is an innocent young child who's been
Think not.
abused at the hands of his family, why are they going through this journey of Vici hell, which is, as we found out in our research, one of the lowest levels of hell in Buddhism, where torments last so long that souls are trapped there for nigh on eternity.
Well, when people are abused in that way, they're not in a mental headspace where like, I'm going to go to heaven after this. They've been pretty beaten down. I can imagine that somebody who's traumatized in this kind of scenario, they're going to assume, yeah, why wouldn't I go to hell? Like, obviously this is happening to me for a reason. I'm a terrible person. Like, I can easily make that connection personally. Like, I could see why that would be the case.
Or is hell, are they in hell? Does Tomino see themselves and the abuse that they're suffering as hellish? In fact, it might make more sense if this was not the poem that forced his parents to put him in the basement, but this was the last poem he wrote after he was put in there, because that would be his journey. He would feel, oh, my family has punished me. I have done something so wrong to land myself in the lowest of the low pits of
And
hell.
clearly in the poem, they had a leather bag that they just jam-packed full of caviar, gave it to Tomino as they threw him down in the cellar.
Right. And I wonder if caviar in the translation is perhaps like not necessarily like a rich, like I associate caviar with like a fancy food that costs a lot of money, but I wonder if it's like, if the translation there was off in somehow and it was maybe like scraps of food or just like some fish eggs that aren't necessarily to be had with. I don't think Tomino's down there sipping champagne and drinking caviar.
Yeah, he's not having a great time, obviously. Based on
Monet's 95. I don't know anything about champagne. That's not even
the 95. Send it back. I only drink the 94. I do find that interesting, the concept of this taking place after being put down there, because it does contextualize a lot of the stuff in the poem. Like, he was preparing for the journey, knows the outcome. You kind of get that story going through it. So I can see that being the case.
Setting the analysis of the poem aside for a moment, let's talk about the curse, because I couldn't find like a news story about anyone specific who had died, but allegedly this was, these people died in the 1980s in Japan. So I don't know that there would be like an article readily available on like a cursory Google search. But there's definitely, the story is always the same, which is a feature of a lot of urban legends. But this one is intriguing to me because it requires you to participate with like a work of art that's, 100 years old, and that you recite this poem, and that somehow that has this overwhelming effect on you, and that something that you will then be essentially cursed.
Yeah, it's fascinating. I wonder too, if this is a trend, how many people were doing it, right? Like because obviously we have the information of 2 people being directly affected by the curse, and or at least in a way that correlates to a point that people can draw that connection. Like, these 2 things are happening together, and it's happened before, so obviously there's a trend here. So I'm wondering, like, how was it, like 2 out of 18,000, or was it like 2 out of 10?
Right.
Like what is that percentage that we're seeing something happen? Like, if it's 2 people very early in the trend, is that going to deter people from doing it? I mean, obviously this trend faded. People stopped doing it after a while.
Because while I was reading that poem, someone in Portland, Oregon, where I'm currently recording, somebody vomited in that moment. I'm sure, just playing a numbers game. It wasn't
this
me.
moment.
In this moment, every 2 seconds, an adult vomits. But the wheel could have turned in my favor if the milk I put in my coffee had spoiled and I didn't realize it. I could have, in theory, what I'm saying is, by statistically, bad things are happening to people all the time, and it's probably going to happen after somebody reads a poem. And if it's trending, and you have, like you said, like 18,000 people all reading this poem, something bad's going to happen to one of them just playing a numbers game.
And I even think that every 2 seconds vomiting is generous, right? Like, we don't know the numbers, right? I mean, how many people die a second? Right? And not to be like too macabre about this. I'm not trying to be like, whatever, the poem's not cursed. I just think, there's definitely going to be coincidence there. And with that scale, for me, that's going to really change those numbers, right? If it's 20% of the people that have done this have died, that's a crazy correlation. But if it's, a needle in a haystack number, then I'm probably not going to be as scared.
The power of one's own thought should also not be disregarded here, because if you really believe that you are going to be made ill by performing an act, it's definitely possible to like make yourself feel nauseous at the very least. I mean, even just knowing that there was some esoteric I'm a skeptic, so in my mind, impossible risk to reading this poem out loud. As I went further into it in that uninterrupted reading, I did start to feel like a slight bit of nervousness. And if I weren't such a skeptic, if I really did believe, I could see myself actually getting sick. I mean, we've all probably had something happen, where you're super embarrassed or something, you get some really bad news and it's a psychological thing, but you become physically ill because of it. So the sickness, I understand. It's the accidents, the falls, the like car crashes, and these deaths. Like I wonder by what mechanism these people were alleged to have died or suffered injury.
Yeah.
Now, after the challenge trend in Japan in the 80s, the curse of Tomino's Hell does go into hibernation a little bit until more recently. In the mid-2010s, the legend is resurrected on internet message boards and goes viral. And this is where the story takes an interesting, less sensational turn. With renewed interest in the poem, people begin digging deeper into the origins of Tomino's Hell. And here's what they found. The poem was, in fact, written in Japan in the early 1900s. I know the first time that I read it, I thought this is a new poem. Like this is like an internet thing that people wrote, whether it was the 80s or the 2010s. This poem doesn't read like something from the early 1900s, but this poem actually was written in the 1900s in Japan, but not by a child. Tomino's Hell was first featured in a self-published volume of poetry titled Gold Dust by Japanese author, poet, and songwriter Saijo Yaso. So yes, take a breath. This poem was not written by a horribly abused child, but Saijo Yaso, the poet who did write it, led a very interesting and colorful life and even had some disturbing facts in there that I think shed some light on the poem and interpretations from it. Lucky?
Yeah, Yaso was born in Tokyo in 1892, where his father was a successful soap maker. Yaso's childhood was a happy one until probably about 1909, when his father would pass away. Yaso's older brother, who didn't happen to be mentioned in the poem, stole the family's fortune and ran away with a woman. And at one point, Saijo was so determined to get the money back that he brought a dagger and hunted his brother down. He even threatened to kill him, saying, "Now I'm a minor, so even if I kill my brother, I can't avoid the death penalty." But
okay,
yeah,
but
sorry. Was there a note?
He's a minor, not a minor. He's under 18
I said
when he's
that.
doing the quote.
Right? Yeah. No, I
No,
got
but
that.
you're doing kind of like a gruff.
I'm pretty sure I'm doing Saijo's voice.
Minor voice.
Okay, I'll try.
He would have been a Japanese teenager at the time.
Sure. Yeah.
No.
Noted. I heard that. Okay, I'll try it again. Yeah, I'm a minor, so even if I kill my brother, I can't avoid that death penalty, gadzooks. But that sentence will take a long time, so I'm begging you to take care of my ma and my sister.
I'm a minor, so even if I kill my brother, I can avoid the death penalty. You sound like a Scooby-Doo character.
Yeah, no, I think I'm nailing it. I don't understand what this note is about.
I'm a minor, so even if I kill my brother, I can avoid the death penalty. But the sentence will take a long time, so I'm begging you to take care of my mother and sister.
Now, Mac, as you pointed out, you actually sound like a 2023 podcaster from Portland, and you're supposed to be sounding like a Japanese child or poet of the 1800s. So why don't you go ahead and try that again? Just as you've noted to me. So why don't you go ahead and do a better take as well?
Okay, a young man. Okay. I'm a minor, so even if I kill my brother. No, this is to me, all jokes aside, this is a very interesting part of the story. We're talking about he's a teenager and he's ready to like murder his brother. And
yeah, he's got a weapon.
Yeah, he like buys a knife and is literally like, well, if I kill him, I'll go to court for it. And because I'm underage, they're not going to like kill me, but I'm going to be in jail for a long time. So take care of my family. This is a kid who's like, lost one of his parents, the breadwinner of the family, and is now like watching his family suffer and starve because of his brother who should have been there. Because that money would have gone a long way towards helping the family. So
I don't really know at what age you become an adult during this time period. I don't know if it's 18 still at that point, but to me, ostensibly, he probably is. He's got to be like 15 or 16 now, right? Because if his brother, older, but still like took the money and ran away with a woman, and he's old enough to like be able to find and procure a knife, I'm kind of assuming we're seeing like a teenager. And that to me makes a little more sense than like an 8-year-old who's like fucking ready to go. I mean, that'd be fascinating. That'd be a crazy life. I just feel like maybe he's 15 or 16 during this period.
The age that you become an adult in this time period is when you go to kill your brother with a dagger because he stole the family fortune. I don't care how old you are, that makes you a man.
In the court of law, I'm pretty sure at any age when those factors stack up.
How did that end?
Well, by the time he confronted his brother, the inheritance had actually largely been spent already, leaving the family struggling financially. So Saijo had to work to support them while they had their business and their home taken away to cover all the family debts that this brother caused.
So flash forward a few years, and Yaso is studying underneath famous poets and critics, and he's getting ready to self-publish his first work of poetry, Gold Dust, which features the poem Tomino's Hell. Now, it's before this where Saijo is allegedly going to suffer a loss that prompts him to write Tomino's Hell. I saw this touted as fact in like every article about the poem, every Reddit thread, but I don't think that is true. Because the popular story goes that either his father passes away in World War I, which we know can't be true because his father died in 1909, 5 years before the war, or the other story goes that his sister passes away, which I wasn't able to get a firm answer on his siblings, but in that quote that we butchered a minute ago, he does mention a sister, and he mentions sisters in a few of his other works. Regardless, in the time before he writes Tomino's Hell, he has struggled. He has thought about murdering his own brother. He got married to a woman, and together they ran a small restaurant, but that also was a failure. And in his neighborhood, he witnessed severe poverty and, by turns, generosity. And these experiences would inspire a lot of his poetry and songs and children's nursery rhymes. And he makes a name for himself. He eventually goes on to study at the Sorbonne. He becomes a professor of French literature and now is regarded as one of the fathers of the modern children's nursery rhyme in Japan. Worth noting also that he cooperated in the Second Sino-Japanese War as Secretary General of the Poetry Section of the Japanese Literature Journal, just to paint a full picture of who this guy was.
It's good to have all the context.
So, with all of that in mind, let's talk theories.
I've got a pretty wild one. And I feel very strongly about it, and I don't think you can convince me otherwise.
Okay, yeah, lay it on me. I'm actually really curious.
I believe that the poem Tomino's Hell is either about one whale specifically or the practice of whaling.
Fascinating.
And I have specific points I'd like to discuss from the poem.
Let's do it.
Obviously, I'm no poet. I think, Mac, you can probably back me up here. Sometimes the words in poems stand for other things. So I've taken this idea and ran with it. I know. I'm just bear with me here. Right, even in the beginning, and you kind of mentioned this point specifically too about the idea of Tomino vomiting precious jewels and what that meant in like Japanese culture and whatnot for victories. I immediately saw that and thought, well, that's ambergris, right? We're talking the very rare substance from a whale's stomach. Japan has a long history of whaling, and it's a very cultural thing. So I don't know why, but that stuck in my head. And then as I was reading through the rest of the poem, to myself, of course, as to not accrue the curse that you've gotten, there were other lines that kind of kept jumping out. There's a lot of this idea of descending alone. Whales are very known for diving to the bottoms of the ocean. That's kind of where they spend most of their time. Caviar. You're talking about descending and spiraling into the depths of hell, which is very much like deep, deep ocean. Obviously this poem was written in the 1800s, so I'm not sure how much they know about deep ocean at that time. But even the one part that really started sticking out to me was this idea of a Vici hell, right? The lowest layer of hell. So I started doing a little research into underwater volcanoes and what that would look like and what that, could potentially stand for. And this is a more current example, but it does kind of, to me, inform the idea that this might be a path. There's this new volcano, or a new island series, I guess, from this underwater volcano, Futokutu Okanoba, which is a massive underwater volcano near Japan that in 2021 erupted so forcefully that it created a new island. So this created new island chains. And as I was researching this is something that's happened over the centuries where these underwater volcanoes would cause discoloration in the water. It would cause buildup of landmass that would come floating up and potentially cause the underwater to become red or dark from the smog and colors that were coming from the volcano. So my brain just kind of connected this idea together of if you're preparing for a journey into hell, you're a whaler, you're seeing the sea churn and bubble and these spirits of whales coming down, singing like nightingales. descending into the pits of hell away from the whaling ships. It all just kind of like started spiraling together to me to be, a potential theory. If we know this is just a poet who is reacting to what he's seeing in his society and living in poverty, where do people in poverty mostly live? By the docks, kind of the slums, right where these whaling ships are going to be prevalent.
If he and his wife own this restaurant, it's very likely that they're going to be dealing with different types of merchants, fishermen.
Mm-hmm.
And so, yeah, I could definitely see that being a connection here.
Yeah.
That's a fascinating take, because my mind, with my interpretations of it, all kind of kept focusing on a more literal interpretation of the text.
Mm-hmm. And I think that the theory falls apart a little bit, especially when you get into the nightingale stuff, because it's just a little bit more like woods and foxflowers.
No nightingales underwater.
Yeah, but like
nightingale can't breathe underwater.
If I know one thing about bird, no breathe water.
Sheep can't breathe underwater.
I think like that's where obviously this theory falls apart a little bit. The singing is what kind of kept me involved. Like, what are whales known for other than being awesome? Singing. So, I think obviously there's some holes in that theory, but as I was reading it, I just kept finding that idea kind of being reinforced. And with poetry being the art form that it is, where you can really just kind of connect these different dots and whatnot, it was an interesting area for my mind to go to.
I'd love to return to a thought we tossed around a little earlier about why Tomino is going to hell, or why he's experiencing this journey through hell. Because if he's vomiting precious jewels at the beginning and has had some kind of victory and he's going to Avicii hell, what would someone need to do to be cast down to the darkest pits? And this is what I found. There are 5 horrible sins you can commit to end up in this place: creating a schism within the community of Buddhist monks and nuns, shedding the blood of a Buddha, killing an enlightened person, or intentionally murdering one's father or one's mother. Now, if we look at Yaso's life, we could see this as a reflection of his intention to kill his brother, because we know that there was a family member that he wanted to kill. It's not quite murdering one of your parents, but it is very close. And maybe he still feels some guilt or loss of his father's death. But if we look at this in the context of just the poem and we strip away the author's life and just look at the text, it's possible that Tomino has done something horrible off page and is now dutifully being punished, because his sisters are vomiting blood and breathing fire, and he's happy. He descends alone into hell. Is it his sister who wields the whip? I mean, maybe he did something that is deserving to be punished.
Game of Thrones style revenge poisoning.
Yes, and if we want to connect the dots back to that urban legend, if we want to consider that as a part of this theory, maybe he was this abused boy who turned the tables on his abusers.
That's interesting. There's a lot of evidence that would stick to that too. I feel like with Nightingale too, many times in literature that is meant to be something like a subterfuge kind of connection. The darkness of the feathers, poison, all of that, like Nightingale, it just kind of like blends together. And plus, Nightshade, Nightingale, lots of kind of similar names in poison creation. It's fascinating.
Then there's the possibility that this urban legend, because we don't know where the story of this young boy comes into play. There's very little in the poem to reinforce the story of the basement. Certainly there's abuse or the disability. So one of my other theories is that the Tomino in that urban legend did exist. And Saijo Yaso is writing about someone that he knew. So that Tomino perhaps was real based on a true person who went through these horrible things, and he is relaying that story. We also don't know what his childhood was like prior to his father's death. That's where the sources I found sort of started. And I'm not saying, I don't want to put words in his mouth that he was abused as a child or anything, but a lot of his stories are from the perspective of children and what it's like to experience childhood as both a beautiful and scary thing. So the idea that Tomino, just because this poem was written by a man who was a little older, who was in his early 20s, doesn't necessarily discredit the idea that the urban legend part of it, of this young boy who was tortured, that doesn't necessarily negate it. They're not mutually exclusive.
Yeah, I agree. I think, especially when you're talking about the research of this guy pulling all of that information from both his life and from where he lived, the poverty, the generosity that he saw. Like, of course, you hear a story about somebody living on the street and they're telling you these terrible things. You're going to internalize that in some way, I would think. And that might just come out to be this story, right? Like maybe this is just the street urchin that he met at some point. Maybe it was somebody famous who or was a family he knew, or there's a lot of connecting dots there, I think, that are enticing to see in the poem itself.
All right, conclusions.
Whaling. It's about whales. Stand by it. I told you it wouldn't convince me.
I think it's a really powerful poem by a very well respected and talented writer. Regardless of the origin or the truth of it, this guy's work was very popular and clearly like strikes a chord with people. And the fact that 100 years later, in places like 4chan and Reddit, people are reading this and, being affected by it in some way. There's a power to these words, whether or not that is going to make you sick or have a car accident or make a movie about it and then die like 10 years later is sort of set aside. These words have carried over. Is there any other like 100-year-old semi-obscure Japanese poem that has had so much discussion about it online and in person? I don't know that there is. So clearly there is some power to these words. How far that power goes and its influence, I can't say until I make it through the next few days without dying of Tomino's curse.
Well, and technically, as we know, 10 years, right? So the clock is starting to tick now. So we'll have to continue this podcast for 10 years. And then Funeral for a Friend, Tomino's curse finally gets you a decade later.
Yeah, you mentioned Terry Yamasuji, who made that movie and later died. I did some of the math just while we were recording. The author did die, but it took 9 years to kill him. So
okay,
if you were to like start adapting it, there was a manga adaptation that came out in 2019, but that author is still alive. So if we're playing the math game, he'll die in 2028 and I'll die in 2032.
So we'll have to keep an eye all 2028 on this specific artist. And find out if they pass, and then we'll know. At least we'll know you'll only have like 4 years left at that point, and we can really capitalize,
Right. Well, we'll use it for the podcast. Surely the show will still be going in 9 years' time.
I don't plan to quit ever. No, I think you make an interesting point of the prevalence of this today, right? Obviously, he's talented. These words resonate with people all the way back in the 1800s up until now. So there is something in these words that keep people coming back over and over again, be it a curse, be it a connection that people feel, or maybe they relate to Tomino in the way that the family abuse is so thinly but veiled but present and kind of the focal point of the poem. I think it'll be something that is talked about for centuries to come.
That is going to wrap up this week's mysteries, but we'll be back next time for more nightmares and more frequencies.
Oh.
If you have a story of the spooky, strange, or unexplained, or a shitty 2-sentence horror story you would like to see featured on the show, we want to hear it. You can reach us by email at nightmarefrequencypodcast@gmail.com or on Instagram and other social media at NightmareFQ.
I want to say thank you to Matt Harris for the use of our theme song, Strange Stuff. Thank you for that, Matt. And thank you for listening. If you like the show, please leave a review on iTunes, Google Podcast, or wherever you're listening from.
Please.
It's super important for new shows to get that kind of coverage early on, and even more important to tell your friends about the show. We don't really do any kind of advertising at all, so word of mouth is the only way for us to grow and connect with a wider audience.
Yeah, if you know someone who's into like kind of strange, spooky, weird stuff, maybe just send them our show their way. If they're a skeptic, I think they'll find something to enjoy, and if they're not a skeptic, they're going to believe whatever we tell them.
If your friend comes to you in a deep sweat and says, I read this poem out loud and now I'm starting to feel bad, send them to us as soon as possible. We would love to, live record a Tomino effect.
Now, before we return you to your regularly scheduled programming, I'd like to leave you with a poem that Saijo Yaso wrote much later in his life that I think offers some context into Tomino's hell and the man who wrote it. It's titled Butterfly. When at last I descend into hell, what will I bring for my mother and father and my friends who are waiting for me there? I think I will reach inside my breast and pull out the pallid, broken body of a butterfly. Then, handing it over, I will say to them, I spent my whole life like a child, lonely, chasing after this.